need to be enjoyed at their very best. Now, peas are definitely coming to the end of their season. And of course, what we love about peas, let's just pick one and show it, are these lovely, tender green peas. There they are. That's the best thing to get now, because they will be disappearing. They'll rapidly be going over. Lovely, really good. And these have only done so well because it's been a relatively mild summer, and we've kept them well watered. Now, if you think of peas, if they are a little bit hard, they can be used for pea soup or mushy peas, and if they're really nice and sweet, you can freeze them very easily. There are two lots here. You can see that this is called Little Marvel, and it's mildewy. The peas are fine, and I shall certainly pick them. But this lot, which is Ambassador, sown on the same day in the same bed, don't seem to be suffering from mildew at all, so that's worth bearing in mind for future reference. And I shall leave these here until the leaves start to turn yellow and brown, and then pull up the whole lot and keep any pods that are remaining for drying and either eating or using as seed. Now, you may remember that we underplanted our sweet corn with courgettes, and we've been harvesting those for the last couple of months and will go on harvesting them to the very last moment. But now is the moment for the sweet corn. This has been quietly growing up above the courgettes, developing its wonderful corns. Now, the reason why we grow sweet corn, as opposed to the maize you see in the fields, that it has this marvellous sweetness. And you'll know if they're ripe, because the tassel at the end is brown and drooping down. And then carefully just peel back the top of the outer sheath, and that should expose the cob inside, and just squeeze one of the grains. And if the juice is milky, then it's ripe. Now, don't pick it, because the whole point is to keep the period from picking it to cooking it as short as you possibly can. Have the water boiling, just break off a cob, or as many as you need, straight back into the kitchen, peel them, pop them in the water, and that way you will capture that amazing sweetness. And like pears, you simply cannot buy that from a shop. You've got to grow it to really know it. Do you remember the carrots that I sowed for the container vegetable garden back in spring? They won't keep over winter, so it's time to harvest them. If there are too many to eat now, you can store them in a box or a container packed with slightly damp sand. I tell you what, this is a fabulous crop. I don't think I've ever seen better. And all from a little tin, perhaps 10 inches by 9. It just shows you what you can grow in a container. It's been a great year for outdoor tomatoes, as good a one as I've known for a long time. But there are always quite a few green ones left. However, that needn't be a disaster. You can just cut off the whole of a vine and then take that and put it in a drawer or in a bowl under a cloth. Even put a banana in it, which will help it ripen, and you'll find that quite a few will ripen in the dark. It may take weeks, but they'll be fine, and they will be ripe when you come to use them. And the ones that don't ripen, and inevitably with outdoor tomatoes, you're going to be left with a number of green ones, don't worry, because green tomato chutney and even green tomato soup are delicious. This is a variety called Mirabelle, and have you ever seen so many tomatoes on one truss? It never fails to excite me digging potatoes. You put your hand in and you pull out magic. Now, these are main crop potatoes, and we can harvest these any time over the next month, but it's a good idea to do it on a dry day when you can get at the soil, and also you can leave the potatoes on the surface for a few hours to dry off, and that way they'll store much better. This is a variety called Sharpo Mara. It was bred in Hungary since before the Second World War from a particular strain taken from Mexico that was very resistant to blight. And that's its main claim, to be a healthy, vigorous, blight-resistant potato. Well, it certainly hasn't got blight this year. Mind you, there hasn't been much blight about, so it's not a real test, but we'll give it further tests in future years. But for an organic grower, a blight-resistant potato is gold dust. The best way to store them is in a sack. If you can get hold of Hessian sacks, that's ideal, or paper sacks, but not polythene or plastic, because they sweat and then they might well rot. If you can't get sacks, try and get some trays and store them in a cool, dark place. Now, however much you love potatoes, and however important they are, not many people would claim that they are the most beautiful of vegetables. However, we paid a trip to Harlow Carr, where all the vegetables are grown to look as attractive as possible.
Here at Harlow Carr, we treat the vegetable area the same as anywhere else in the garden. It's got to be very decorative, but it's also got to be productive. And we choose the varieties with that in mind. Vegetables should be a feast for the eyes as well as the table. I'm really passionate about vegetables. I'd really like people to grow them as well, but not feel that they've got to get into these great allotment situations or have a great complicated time for it. Just use a bit of bare earth that you've got and you can grow just about anything. We use a lot of pots in the garden. It's a great opportunity to use spaces that are occurring naturally throughout your herbaceous borders or shrubberies throughout the year. So we've actually got pots that we've sowed with vegetables, salads, and then as these are harvested or go over, we can have some more waiting to go in. Some of the pots will just sit on the surface, and some of them we'll put a little bit further back and sink them slightly so they get the benefits of keeping the roots cool and we don't have to do so much watering. In this bed, we've chosen a combination of plants to give some height in the kitchen garden. The amaranth over here is a relation to the Love Lies Bleeding amaranth, but this is a grain plant. We've never grown it up here before, so we're going to be interested to see what happens with that. Sunflowers, of course, are great for the wildlife. They attract lots of bees, hoverflies, and later on when the seeds form, you get a crop, of course, of sunflower seeds that you can eat yourself. At the front here, we've got a beautifully coloured runner bean, and I think this combination works really well as a whole. Flowers are a great thing to have in the vegetable garden, of course. As well as looking attractive, they bring in lots of wildlife, and several are edible. For example, the borage flowers, the nasturtium, and also calendulas or pot marigolds.
Well, just like the ornamental vegetable garden at Harlow Carr, here in the small town fruit garden, we try and make sure that there are not just good things to eat, but that the whole place looks beautiful all the time. And one of the things that looks best at the moment is these herbs. They look fantastic. And not only are they looking beautiful, but there are absolutely masses of things that we can harvest right now. This tarragon, for instance. This is one of the best herbs. It's French tarragon, and it's tender, so we need to cut it now if we're going to actually preserve it for the winter. And you just chop off nice big chunks. With any of these soft leaf herbs, tarragon and parsley, coriander, chives, all those things that are green and soft, the best thing to do is to freeze them. So pop them straight into a freezer bag. And the time of day you pick them is important too. You want to make sure that it's early in the morning, but when the dew's evaporated, but before all the volatile oils have been released, so they're packed with flavour. So while you're on your way to the freezer, why not take a few of these beautiful borage flowers with you? Now this is the white flowered form. Usually it's blue, but this is just as decorative. And all you do is just pull the top of the flower like that, and the whole thing will come out. So I'm going to collect a few of these now, and you can actually put those into ice cubes, into an ice cube tray, run some water on them and freeze them, and they make a lovely decorative addition to your Christmas drinks. One of the herbs you're often told to dry is rosemary, But frankly, why bother? This bush is going to stand like this all winter long, and any time we want to, we can come out and take a few shoots. Just look at all these lovely little shoots, and they're perfect for taking heel cuttings. Just pull them down, hold on to the stem firmly whilst you're doing it, and take them all with this little tiny heel here. I can't resist making new plants, but especially I would love to use some of these new plants in the brand new garden we're going to make here at Berryfields next year. So, when you've got a handful of these cuttings, just take them back to the table, and it's a good idea to inspect them, and if any of them have got a long heel on them, that's a bit tatty. So just take a sharp knife and tidy that up. Now, heel cuttings are particularly successful at this time of year because you've got a bit of a cambium layer exposed, which is the layer which actually makes the new roots. And also they shouldn't rot. This wood is quite firm there, although the top's fairly soft. So just trim some of these bottom leaves too, so that they're not in contact with the compost you put them into. And nip out the growing tip, because that will actually make the cutting bush out. And what you put them in is really important. You can buy a proprietary cuttings compost at the garden centre, but we like to make our own here, and we do it with 4 simple ingredients: horticultural grit, some horticultural sand, some peat-free compost, and some loam in fairly equal proportions. So just tap it down firmly and level the compost off, and then just put your cuttings around the edge of it. We can probably fit about 10 or possibly even 15, as long as they're not actually touching one another around the edge of the pot. Now, I've finished these off with some nice coarse grit. That'll aid drainage, and it'll also retain the moisture in the pot. And I'm going to water it well once, and that should be enough to keep it going. Always keep an eye on them during the winter, don't let them dry out. Now, if you haven't got a greenhouse, there are all sorts of other things that you can modify or use. This is an old fish tank, and it would be perfectly adequate for a couple of pots of cuttings. Or how about this for a really wonderful coal frame, incredibly cheap too. Now, it's constructed from a non-returnable pallet. Make sure it is non-returnable, otherwise they'll be after you. It's ideal, I think. Again, you want to stand it in a nice sheltered place. And make the top out of any material that's see-through. That's the important thing, to get plenty of light in there. So we're going to sit our cuttings straight in there. It's lined with sand. You'll be perfectly happy in there for the winter.
Well, I can tell you there's some fruits I won't let the birds anywhere near if I can help it, and that's our raspberries. I love raspberries. So much nicer than strawberries. And they're always a treat, whereas you can have almost too many of every other fruit. These are autumn raspberries, and it's a variety called Joan J. Not grown it before, it's a new one. We've also got the much more familiar Autumn Bliss. Now, Autumn Bliss is a really good, tasty raspberry, and I'd certainly recommend it to anyone. But the potential advantages of Joan J are that it's thornless, it's got a longer fruiting season, and has larger fruit. Well, it tastes good too, but then to me, all raspberries taste good. But certainly, if it's as good as Autumn Bliss, it'll be well worth growing. Now, there are 2 types of raspberry. There are summer fruiting and autumn fruiting. Summer fruiting produce their fruit on the previous year's canes. Autumn fruiting produce the fruit on the current season's canes. And we've planted some summer fruiting here at Berryfields, but we did so this year, so because it won't be till next year that this year's growth provides us with fruit to harvest. But the beauty of autumn fruiting is all you have to do is at Christmas time cut everything above ground, flush to the ground, and that's it. They then grow up next year and produce their fruit. So looking after them is a doddle. Now, when it comes to harvesting, the greatest problem, and this can be quite serious, is not eating too many before you get back to the kitchen. And you're looking for a nice ripe fruit. That one, for example, is a little bit overripe. Pull it off and it can disintegrate, but makes perfect jam, even if they're very mushy, so don't leave them behind for the birds. But if you get a really ripe fruit like that one, you should be able to just pull gently and it leaves behind that little white cone. If it doesn't come off easily, it's not ripe yet. Now, while I'm picking the raspberries,